On the same day I lost my job, my wife packed her bags and said, "I didn't sign up for this life. I didn't beg her to stay. I let her go." And that decision changed everything. I want to tell you about the worst day of my life, and I want to tell you about it honestly, which means telling you not just what happened, but what I felt and what I thought and what I did and did not do in response to it. Because the honest version of the worst days is always more complicated than the clean version, and the complicated version is the one that actually teaches you something. The worst day started at 9 in the morning in a conference room on the 14th floor of the building where I had worked for 11 years, and it ended at 11 at night in a bedroom that was half empty in a way it had not been that morning. And what happened between those 2 points is the story I am going to tell you. My name is Marcus. I am 41 years old now. I was 38 on the day I am describing. I had been a senior project manager at a mid-sized construction firm for 11 years, which is long enough to have built something substantial in terms of relationships and reputation and institutional knowledge, long enough that the job had stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like the structure of my identity, which is the thing nobody tells you to watch out for, because everyone does it and everyone pays for it eventually. I was married to a woman named Claudia. We had been married for 7 years when that day happened. We did not have children, which had been a source of tension in the marriage for the previous 2 years, but which we had not resolved into either a decision or an acceptance, which is its own kind of problem. We had a house we had bought together 4 years in a neighborhood we had chosen together, with a mortgage that required both our incomes to be comfortable and required one income to be survivable if that income was sufficient, which mine was and hers was not quite. I want to tell you about Claudia before I tell you about the day, because she is not a villain in this story, and I want you to understand that from the beginning. She was 35 at the time, worked as a marketing coordinator, was smart and social, and had a genuine talent for creating the kind of life that looks warm and curated and intentional from the outside. She cooked well and had strong opinions about furniture and maintained friendships with a dedication that I admired. She loved, I believe, what the life we had together represented, the house, the stability, the particular version of comfortable adulthood that we had assembled, and I think her love for the life was genuine, even if it was inseparable from her love for what the life required to be sustained. I did not understand this distinction clearly until the day I am going to tell you about. The conference room meeting on the 14th floor was called at 9 and was attended by me, my direct supervisor, and a woman from HR named Linda who I had spoken to perhaps twice in 11 years. The meeting lasted 14 minutes. In those 14 minutes I was told that the company was going through a restructuring, that my position was being eliminated as part of a reduction in force that affected multiple departments, that my 11 years of service were appreciated and had been recognized in the severance package being offered, and that security would escort me to collect my personal items after the meeting. I want to describe what I felt in those 14 minutes because I think it is important, and because most accounts of these moments skip it. What I felt in the first 2 minutes was a kind of cognitive dissonance, the experience of receiving information that your brain recognizes as significant while your emotional system is still loading the appropriate response. Then something colder, a settling, the feeling of the room becoming very clear and very specific, the particular texture of the conference table, and the specific quality of the light and Linda's careful, professional expression. Then, toward the end, a numbness that I understand in retrospect as protection, the mind doing what it does when the full weight of something is more than it wants to absorb in real time. I thanked them. I shook hands. I collected my things in a box that security provided, which was beige cardboard and slightly too small, and I carried it to my car in the parking structure, and I sat in my car for 45 minutes. I called Claudia from the parking structure. I called her because she was my wife, and this was significant news, and she was the person you call when significant things happen. She answered on the third ring. I told her what had happened. There was a pause that was longer than I expected. She said she was sorry. She said she was sure it would be fine. She said we should talk when she got home. The quality of that pause stayed with me for the rest of the drive home. Not the words, which were the appropriate words. The pause. The specific length and texture of it, the pause of someone receiving information and doing a quick and instinctive calculation about what it means. I drove home. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with a coffee and my laptop, and I began doing what you do in those first hours, which is trying to impose structure on a situation that has just removed the structure you had. I updated my resume. I made a list of contacts to reach out to. I looked at job boards to understand the landscape. I did these things with a focused practicality that I now recognize as a way of not sitting with the feeling, which was large and without clear edges and not yet safe to look at directly. Claudia came home at 6:30. I had made dinner, partly because I needed something to do with my hands, and partly because dinner seemed like a way of establishing normalcy. She sat down and we ate and we talked about what had happened, and I told her the details, the meeting, the severance, the timeline, and she listened and asked questions that were practical and appropriate. After dinner, she was quiet. Not hostile, not cold, quiet in a way that had a specific weight to it, the quiet of someone who is thinking something they have not yet decided to say. I asked her what she was thinking. She said she needed some time to process. I said that was fine and that we could talk whenever she was ready. She went to the bedroom. I cleaned up from dinner and then sat in the living room and looked at the severance paperwork the company had sent to my email and tried to understand the full picture of what the next few months could look like financially. The picture was manageable, but not comfortable. The severance was 3 months. My savings were adequate for another 3 beyond that. The mortgage required attention. These were solvable problems, not crisis-level problems, but they were real and they required a plan. I heard Claudia moving around in the bedroom. More than the ordinary movement of someone getting ready for bed. Heavier, more purposeful. I went to the bedroom door and opened it. She was packing a suitcase. Not the small one. The large one, the one she used for trips of a week or more, open on the bed with clothes folded into it in the careful way she packed, which was methodical and organized, and which I had found endearing every time I had watched it before, and which now had a quality I did not have a word for. I asked her what she was doing. She stopped. She looked at me. And then she said, with a directness that I will not forget, the sentence that I am going to be thinking about for the rest of my life. She said she had not signed up for this life. She did not say it cruelly. I want to be specific about that. She said it with a kind of exhausted honesty, the tone of someone who has been thinking something for a while and has decided that the time for not saying it has passed. She said it looking at me directly, which told me she was not performing it and was not using it as ammunition. She was just saying it, the true thing, the thing she had apparently been sitting with in the bedroom for the previous 2 hours. I asked her what she meant. She said she had married someone who had a stable career and a clear direction, and that the stability had been part of what she had wanted and chosen, and that the life we had built was built on that foundation, and that she did not know how to be the person who carried things, who was the financial anchor while a partner rebuilt. That was not the role she had imagined for herself, and she was not sure she was capable of it. She said she had a friend whose couch she could stay on while she figured things out. I stood in the doorway and looked at my wife packing her suitcase, and I felt a number of things simultaneously, the way you do when a situation is too large for any single feeling. I felt a kind of shock that was different from the shock of the morning, more personal and more cutting. I felt a flicker of anger that came and went quickly. I felt, and this is the one I have thought about most, something that was almost like recognition, the specific experience of a thing you have been not quite seeing coming into focus, the click of a picture resolving. I thought about the pause on the phone. I thought about the quality of her practicality at dinner, which had been the practicality of someone assessing a situation rather than supporting a person. I thought about the 2 years of unresolved tension about children and what it had revealed about the difference between what each of us wanted and what each of us was willing to do for the other. I thought about the life we had built and whose life it had primarily been and who had been maintaining its shape most of the time. And then I made the decision that I think is the most important thing I did that entire day, more important than the parking structure and the resume and the severance paperwork. I decided not to fight for her to stay. Not because I did not love her. I did love her in the complicated way of 7 years of shared life, and the love was real. Not because I was giving up without caring, but because what she had just said was the most honest thing she had said to me in years, possibly in our entire marriage, and I understood that honesty is information I needed and had not had, and that fighting against it would be fighting against the truth of what our marriage was rather than fighting for what it could become. She had told me who she was and what she needed. She needed stability as a condition of the relationship rather than as a possible outcome of it. She needed a partner who provided security rather than someone she might sometimes need to provide it for. These were legitimate needs. They were just not needs that were compatible with a complete human life with a complete human person, because complete human people sometimes lose their jobs and need time to rebuild. And a relationship that cannot survive that is not a relationship that was ever going to survive the full weight of being alive. I said, okay. She looked at me. I said, I'm not going to ask you to stay. If this is what you need, you should go. She had expected something different. I could see it in her face. She had expected argument, or tears, or bargaining. or some version of the scene that happens when a person tells their spouse they are leaving and the spouse attempts to prevent it. What she had not expected was the particular quiet with which I said, okay, which was not defeat and was not indifference, but was something she apparently did not have a ready response to. She finished packing. She called a friend. She took the large suitcase and her toiletry bag and a tote with some things she needed immediately, and she stood at the door for a moment and looked at me in a way that I think contained genuine regret, and I think the regret was real, and I nodded at her, and she left. I stood in the hallway for a while. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea, because I had already had enough coffee for one day, and I needed something warm to hold, and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house, and I allowed myself, for the first time all day, to simply feel what I felt. What I felt was enormous. I'm not going to try to name all of it precisely, because I'm not sure precise naming is possible for what the combination of job loss and marital abandonment in a single day produces in a person's body and mind. It was large, and it was heavy, and it had sharp edges in places I did not expect. I sat with it for a long time. Then I went to bed, and I lay in the bed that was half empty in a way it had not been that morning, and I stared at the ceiling for a long time, and at some point I slept. The weeks following are important to tell you about because they are where the real story is, not the single dramatic day, but the long, ordinary aftermath. I want to be honest that the first 2 weeks were genuinely hard in ways I was not entirely prepared for, even though I had made the choice to let Claudia go without a fight, and even though I believed, in the clear thinking part of myself, that the choice was right. Belief that a thing is right does not prevent you from feeling the absence of it. The house was quiet in the specific way of a house that is used to containing 2 people and now contains 1. The rhythms of the day were wrong in small ways that accumulated. I woke up at the same time and made coffee for 2 by muscle memory before catching myself. I did not call Claudia during those 2 weeks. She texted once, a brief message saying she was okay and was thinking and would be in touch about practical matters when she was ready. I responded that I hoped she was well and that I was here when she wanted to talk. Then I put the phone down and focused on the things I could control. The job search was my primary focus, and I approached it with the same organized intensity one had brought to project management for 11 years, because redirecting professional skills toward a professional problem is one of the more useful things you can do when your personal life has become temporarily unmanageable. I reached out to my network systematically and honestly. I told people I had been laid off in a restructuring and was looking for the right next thing, which is a statement that is completely true, and also the statement that best serves you in a professional context. I had 3 informational conversations in the first week and 2 formal interviews in the second. My friend Thomas, who I had known since university and who had been through his own significant difficulties in the years before I met him, came over on the Saturday of the first week. He brought beer and a willingness to sit without managing the conversation, which is the thing I most needed and that he most reliably provides. We sat on the back porch and talked and did not talk, and he said at one point that what Claudia had done was one of the most clarifying things a person could do for someone, even if it did not feel that way yet. I said I was not sure I was at the yet part. He said the yet always comes. I called my parents during the second week. My mother, who has a gift for saying the right thing without ornamentation, said she was sorry about the job and sorry about Claudia, and that she had always thought I was stronger than I knew. My father, who expresses things less directly, asked about the severance package and the job prospects, and then said, at the end of the conversation, that some things leaving makes room for better things entering. He said it in the offhand way of someone who is not sure if he is being helpful, but is trying anyway, and I found it more useful than a more polished version of the same thought would have been. The divorce conversation happened in the 4th week. Claudia called and asked if we could meet, and we did at a coffee shop that was neutral ground, and she arrived looking tired and more tentative than I had seen her look before. She said she had been thinking and that she wanted to be honest. She said she knew what she had done was not fair. She said she had panicked, which I believed, and that the panic had come from a fear she had been carrying for a long time about what it would mean to be in a position of financial vulnerability, which traced back to things in her childhood that she did not fully elaborate on but that I understood in outline. I told her I appreciated the honesty. I told her I was not angry, which was true by that point even if it had not been entirely true in the first week. I told her I thought we had both learned something about the difference between what we each needed in a marriage and that those needs were not compatible, which was not anyone's fault but was real. She asked if I wanted to try. I thought about it. I sat with the question honestly and gave it the attention it deserved. And then I said no. Not with anger, not with the satisfaction of someone turning down what was withdrawn and then offered back. Just know with the clean clarity of someone who has spent 4 weeks sitting with the truth and has arrived at a place of knowing what it is. She nodded. She looked sad and also, I thought, slightly relieved, which confirmed something about the question having been more obligatory than genuine. We agreed to begin the process of separating practically. The house was the most significant thing to address, and we addressed it carefully with attorneys and eventually reached a fair arrangement. The process was not pleasant, but it was not destructive. We were both trying, I think, to get through it with as much dignity as the situation allowed. I got a job offer in the 8th week. Not the first offer I received. I had received one earlier that I had declined because it was a lateral move into a role that would have required compromises I was not willing to make just because I was in a vulnerable position, which was a decision that cost me some anxiety, but that I am proud of. The offer I accepted in the 8th week was for a director-level position at a firm whose work I genuinely respected, at a compensation that was a meaningful step up from what I had been earning. The role had been identified through a contact who had heard about my availability through the network I had spent 20 years building and had not adequately appreciated. I signed the offer on a Thursday morning, and I sat for a while afterward in the quiet of my house, which by then I had started to feel differently about, less as a space that was missing something and more as a space that was fully mine for the first time. I had rearranged things, not dramatically, not as performance, but in the small ways of a person who has discovered that the arrangement of a shared life reflects two sets of preferences, and that the arrangement of a solitary life can reflect just one, which turns out to be a modest pleasure with an outsized effect on how you feel in your own space. I thought about the day 8 weeks earlier, the conference room and the parking structure and the suitcase and the okay. I thought about how the day had looked from inside it and how it looked from 8 weeks out. From inside, it was the worst day of my life. From 8 weeks out, it looked like the day that had, by removing two things simultaneously, created the conditions for me to rebuild from the ground up in a way that was more genuinely mine than what I had been living. I want to be careful about this kind of retrospective framing because I think it can be dishonest. It is too easy to look back at a painful thing and say it was a gift, and that retroactive narrative can minimize the real suffering of the in-between period. The 8 weeks between the worst day and the job offer were genuinely hard. There were mornings that were heavy in ways that required effort to get through. There was a period around week 3 where the combined weight of the job situation and the separation and the solitude produced a low-grade darkness that I sat with carefully and monitored and addressed by increasing my contact with people I trusted and being honest with my doctor and doing the practical things that keep the darkness from becoming something more serious. I am telling you about that period because I think it is the part that gets omitted from these stories, and the omission does a disservice to anyone who is inside their own version of it and does not see the hard middle being acknowledged. The hard middle is real. It is survivable. It does not last as long as it feels like it will last. 3 years out from that day, I am in a life that I recognize as mine in a way the previous life was not entirely. I am good at my job and I know it, and I do not need external validation to be confident of it, which is the professional version of the same thing I learned personally, which is that your value is not contingent on someone else's continued presence in your life. I have a house that is fully mine, arranged how I want it, with the kind of silence that I have learned is not loneliness, but is simply quiet, and quiet is not the same as empty. I am in a relationship that I entered carefully, and that has the quality I was looking for, which is the quality of two people who are complete on their own and choosing each other from that completeness rather than from need. Her name is Nadia. She is a civil engineer and has opinions about structural integrity that apply to both buildings and relationships, which I find useful. She knew about my history before we became serious because I told her, which is the way I have decided to do things now, direct and early, because people who are right for you can receive the full story and people who are not right for you reveal themselves quickly when you offer it. Claudia remarried 2 years after our divorce. I know this from mutual acquaintances, and I received the information with genuine goodwill, which surprised me less than it would have surprised the version of me who sat in the parking structure on the worst day. I hope she is happy. I mean that without irony or qualification. The thing I want to say, if this story has a lesson, and I am wary of stories that reach too neatly for lessons, is about the relationship between loss and identity. The day I lost my job, I also lost the identity I had built around it, and the day Claudia left, I lost the identity I had built around a marriage, and the experience of losing both in the same day was, underneath all the pain, the experience of finding out what was left when you stripped away the structures and asked what was actually there. What was there was more than I expected. The qualities I had spent 11 years applying to project management, patience, organization, the ability to assess a situation clearly and move through it methodically, turned out to be mine independent of any job. The capacity to love and build and invest in something turned out to be mine independent of any particular person to direct it toward. The person who had built those things was still present when the things themselves were gone. I said okay in the doorway because I understood, faster than I might have expected, that fighting for someone who had revealed the limits of their commitment was not the same as fighting for something worth keeping. I let her go because holding on would have required me to make her smaller truth into a larger lie, and I had spent enough of my life inside a story that was not quite the story I thought it was. She said she had not signed up for this life. What I have discovered in the 3 years since is that the life she did not sign up for turned out to be the one worth living. I am living it. That is enough.